Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles, the Friday podcast all about your Kindle. I'm Len Edgerly. Today is March 16th, 2018. I am back home in Denver after a full week in Austin, Texas, where I attended South by Southwest Interactive, probably about my 10th year going to the event. It seemed a little smaller, not as many people bustling on the sidewalk between the venues. And the one night that I went out on 6th Street where there's a lot of music, it just seemed kind of muted. Part of it was they had big crowd handling barriers so that if you wanted to cross from one side of the street to the other to check out another band, you had to go all the way to the crosswalk to get there. So we felt like we were being herded like cattle, but there weren't that many cattle being herded the night that I was there. There was plenty of great content at the conference itself. There's more than you can sample in any given time block, but they are getting better and better at providing an app called the South by Southwest Go app where you can scan events by different topics and venues, and then you can create a folder, a favorites folder, so it's very easy to navigate among the events. I don't know of another event that I attend where they're getting better at handling things. They even had a thing where if there was a big event, like in Ballroom D at the Austin Convention Center, and you were headed there, you could pick up your app on the phone, and there was a 3-color code. Green meant plenty of time, don't rush to get there. Yellow meant the room is filling up quickly, you better move. And red meant it was just an overflow crowd. There might be an overflow room you could go to, but you weren't going to be able to sit there with the speaker. The big topic that I knew I was going to be drawn to, but I was surprised at how complete my attention was taken by the topic of Bitcoin and blockchain. And so I ended up not covering items like virtual reality. There was some interesting things about self-driving cars and even artificial intelligence. There was plenty of good sessions on those, but anytime I had a chance to learn something more about this blockchain technology that's behind Bitcoin, introduced in 2009, that's where I went. The result is I think I grok this technology certainly better than I did a week ago, and I hope I'm going to be able to share my impression of it in a way that's interesting and useful to you, along with some interviews and some excerpts from the sessions that I attended. Let's get started.
In 2009, Bitcoin was invented. Satoshi Nakamoto, in inventing that system, invented 3 things, really. First was the blockchain.
You're listening to Joseph Lubin, who addressed a big crowd in Ballroom D on the first day of the conference. He is the co-founder of Ethereum, which is one of the most important entities now in the whole blockchain infrastructure. So his description of how it got started has the benefit of coming from a pioneer in the space. The title of his presentation was Why Ethereum is Going to Change the World. We'll pick up as he's describing blockchain, the underlying technology.
This new kind of trustworthy database system, trustworthy because it's a shared infrastructure where many different actors are all contributing to validating transactions, to securing the network, and the fact that it's realized over so many thousands of nodes makes it impossible or extremely difficult to corrupt. So the second application is the Bitcoin. The Bitcoin itself, a money, a numeraire, a payment system. That was the second invention. On the first invention, the blockchain. The third one's a little more esoteric. It's crypto economics. Crypto economics is a way of doing incentivized mechanism design to enable lots of different actors to contribute their resources to validating transactions and securing that network. And so it was the first time in history where a money system was built in a fully decentralized way that was essentially of the people, by the people, and for the people.
Each time I sat down at a session about blockchain and Bitcoin, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. And one thing which I realized early on was I didn't understand actually what the internet was, which started in the 1990s. I was using it. I can remember the first time I realized I could send an email to Bill Gates because his email address was in a New Yorker article. So I had the experience of, again, seeing something coming which was amazing. It seemed really important, and there were ways to play with it that over time led me to have a familiarity with it. This new phenomenon, the blockchain technology, is a protocol. And so what my understanding of it is that it's a way of computers talking to each other, which is what the internet was when it was just moving data between computers. And now, because of cryptography and all of these other pieces that fell into place that Joseph Lubin's talking about, there's a way to actually move value on the internet. So it's like a layer built on the internet. But I found it very helpful, this brief description of the internet by Doc Searles on another panel. Unfortunately, this is not the audio that was available on the South by Southwest site itself. I recorded it from my seat, so it's a little hard to hear, but it's short, and I think it provides a fundamental way to begin understanding both the internet and the new blockchain technology, which is being built on the internet or within the internet. I'm not sure what would be the right preposition there, but here's Doc Searles.
The internet protocol is a miracle that was visited upon the world and changed everything with what amounts to kind of a handshake. It was an agreement. An internet protocol is nothing more than an agreement between things about how to move data back and forth. It didn't have billing built into it. It didn't have governance built into it. It was what a bunch of geeks came up with as the easiest way to move data between any 2 points.
I heard another speaker explain the difference between the internet and what's coming now through blockchain is that with the internet, we're sending copies of files. In other words, if I send a PDF to you by the internet, the PDF stays on my computer even as you can open it from an email on your computer. With blockchain, we now have the ability to send a unique object, so that if I have an Ether, which is a unit of currency on kind of the second most dominant currency compared to Bitcoin, if I send you an Ether, I don't have it anymore. You have it, and it can only exist in one place or the other. The radical part of the blockchain technology, which was emphasized a lot in the sessions that I heard, is its decentralized nature. If I send you an Ether, there isn't a central place that tracks my ethers and yours. That information is spread out over thousands of nodes of computers that are hooked up to the system, and anytime there's a change, it gets put on all of those separate computers instead of a central computer. There's a lot of power toward democratization, and some of the language about power to the people comes from that sense that the controlling institutions for money over the past 500 years, there is now an alternative because of the technology, the blockchain technology, where a ledger can occur simultaneously on all these different nodes as opposed to in a centralized place. That part I sort of get. I have that image of 1,000 computers in an audience, and someone on the stage calls out a transaction and they all enter the transaction. That gives me sort of an image of what a decentralized database looks like, which is what's meant by blockchain. I have a lot harder time getting my mind around the cryptocurrency part of this, because what happened with the creation of Bitcoin, it appears to be a combination of that distributed database plus advances in encryption, which make it possible to have nearly impossible, probably truly impossible codes. If you set up some value, and I've bought one Ether, so I have some value now, and I created a way for it to exist on the Ethereum blockchain, which is the Ethereum database distributed over all these nodes. And the private key that was assigned to me, that it was in bold font over and over, it was said, "Do not lose this key. If you lose this key, you will not be able to get the money that you have in this Ether that I bought with real money from my checking account." And someone said at one point that of all the Bitcoins that have been purchased since the start of the Bitcoin, back when it was just a few cents a unit, 30% of those people have lost their private keys and they have no way to get that money back. wasn't much of a problem when people were just fooling around with it, and it was pennies when it got up to $30,000 or however high it got last year. If you had lost your private key, that would have been really something. So the encryption part of it is apparently, listening to people who appear to know what they're talking about, very powerful, and that's an essential part of the what's coming. After listening to Joseph Lubin in that, I think that was maybe the earliest session that I attended, I was sitting next to a guy who lives on an island in Brazil. He'd come over 5,000 miles to get to Austin. He was in southern Brazil, and he said his work is in big data, so he wasn't like an English professor or something, or a podcaster like me. He was somebody that was in the world of computers, and this is how he described his reaction after we had heard the hour-long talk by Joseph Lubin. The name of the guy that you will hear next is the one that was sitting next to me, Johnny Hoppen.
As a beginner in this cryptocurrency, as most of the people here who doesn't know what is going on, I think there is still a long way to be really safe for the overall people. And I agree with him in the terms of how deep it is into society.
Johnny was making the point that this issue goes so deep into society. In 1 hour, listening to Joseph Lubin, we heard about the technical issues, the relations among people, intermediaries, the structure of democracy. This technology reaches out into so many different areas. It's like the old image of a group of blind men trying to understand what an elephant is just by touching a trunk or a leg. That was the sense that I had as I moved through these sessions at South by Southwest. As an example, there was a session strictly about use of blockchain in mobility applications, rideshare, cars. There was a really high-level executive from Toyota who has been working on this for a number of years. He told a story about the chief financial officer of Toyota several years ago saying, what is this Bitcoin business? And the speaker on the panel said, well, I can assure you, given that I have an economics degree from Amherst, nothing is going to come of this. This is just lunacy. And now he has to realize sheepishly that if he had had a more positive reaction to the importance of Bitcoin when it first came out, that would have been about 100,000% increase in the value if the CFO had bought one. He apparently hadn't held that against them, and Toyota was doing some very interesting things in tying up the blockchain technology in future uses on cars. There was another panel that was all about healthcare, and it was people in the healthcare business who are exploring how patients might be able to take their individual data across hospitals, across providers, across pharmacies, so that instead of each of the players in the healthcare system having a silo of information, the blockchain technology, the decentralized nature of the database would enable a patient to have information that would be updated instantly if you have a prescription or there's some kind of a diagnosis, that information would update across the system, and anybody that came across you in an emergency room might have all of the information they need to treat you. This is really sort of a starry vision at this point because the data is so held so carefully. Obviously, health data is important, that to break down the silos and to start establishing standards that would enable health care information to move across this new technology is some ways down the road. But you could see, in terms of the cost of health care and all of the things that are coming in transportation, the people who are actually starting to work in this area, as opposed to just flap their mouths and say, oh, this is really important and you should pay attention. These are people whose jobs are to figure out how various companies are going to take advantage of this technology and, ahead of their competitors, but also on behalf of all of us. The next development that I'm going to tell you about is an amazing role that the state of Wyoming is playing in blockchain technology. Darlene and I met in Casper, Wyoming, and lived there for 20 years. So at one session, I saw a woman sitting up on the stage wearing cowboy boots and a nice cowboy hat, and I thought, I wonder what this is going to be about. I'll tell you in just a minute. I want to paint a little bit of the picture of what it's like down there in Austin. The thousands of people. I'm not sure exactly how many people attended Interactive this year. We'll know that information later. But it's a bustling place, and there's all these different venues, and a great chance to feel the energy of all the people that come, just the way I did, to learn what's happening. It's also a chance for me to connect with listeners, and Catherine Malm is a longtime listener of the podcast. We arranged to meet for kind of a brunch at Le Café Crêpe, which is a favorite place of mine, not far from the JW Marriott, and there's a French guy that runs it, so I get to practice my French a little bit with him. The crepes were delicious. The coffee was good. It was a little chilly out on the sidewalk. Weather never got really too hot in Austin, but it was very pleasant, high in the mid to high 60s, mostly sunny. And because of the podcast, just about any city I go, I'm going to end up having a chance to get caught up with friends.
I'm Catherine Malm, and I own Peter Pan Mini Golf here in Austin.
What are you using for a Kindle to read on these days?
I'm still using the second generation Paperwhite.
And you came close to using an Oasis. What happened?
Well, when I got it, it was defective. It had a really sharp edge on one side. I sent it back to get a replacement. It was going to take 2 months to get the new one. And in the meantime, I thought my Paperwhite's just fine. I don't need anything new. So I'm still using it.
So what kind of a Kindle might tempt you to finally leave your Paperwhite?
Color. Absolutely color. That would do it. And getting the text-to-speech and all the other things for being able to listen to things as well as read, I would be happy with that.
Let's return now to that Wyoming story that I mentioned earlier. The session where the woman in the cowboy boots and the cowboy hat turned up on the stage, she wasn't on the program. It was a session called Why Blockchain Tech Equals 10x of the Internet's Value, and the single speaker was someone who had experience as an investor in blockchain technology. But she had invited Brittany Kaiser to join her. As I look at it, maybe Brittany Kaiser was born in Wyoming. Most of her career has been on Wall Street and elsewhere, but she got involved in a very unusual effort headed up by a woman named Caitlin Long in Wyoming to fix a problem with Wyoming's money laws that was making it very difficult to even have Coinbase, which is an app that I've used to buy Ether the first time, operate in the state. Well, they got that solved, and then they ended up becoming the first elected body in the world to state that this currency can be legitimate property, an asset value which can be regulated by the states. There's a big issue. The legal issues are really thorny between the Securities and Exchange Commission and the SEC and other parts of the government as to whether any of these blockchain tokens or currencies are actually money investments that should be regulated by the SEC or not. And that's probably a whole nother show to get into those distinctions. But the story of the Wyoming legislature, where I lobbied for about 10 years when I lived in Casper, becoming the first place in the world to establish cryptocurrencies as an asset class, I couldn't wait when the session ended to go up and talk to Brittany Kaiser and ask her, what did that look like, this fairly complex technology getting passed by the Wyoming legislature, which meets 20 days a year and 40 days a year, depending on whether there's a budget session. It's a very folksy, intimate, wonderful democratic institution, which I spent a lot of time lobbying for when I was there.
It was an incredible experience, actually. I found out that these bills hit the House, HB 70 and HB 19, on January 30th. Caitlin Long and Tyler Lindholm at the House of Representatives, where he got all of the people that were endorsing, sponsoring the bills, brought blockchain entrepreneurs from all over the world there when it was announced, on the House floor. This very quickly turned into everyone in the House of Representatives getting on board, whether they understood the technology or needed to have plenty of meetings to start to understand what the value would be. It only took a couple weeks for the entire House to be convinced and both of those bills to be passed unanimously, 60 to 0. Unanimously. It's absolutely incredible.
That was the House of Representatives, and a unanimous vote. Amazing. On the other side of the Wyoming Capitol, which is a beautiful dome, it's a wonderful building, it turned, of course, that the bill had to be passed by the Senate before it could be signed by the governor.
We met with all of them, one by one, to explain to them what we were bringing to the industry, what we were going to bring to Wyoming, and what we do with blockchain. We are normal people. We're not... we're not these, random anarchists or terrorists or drug dealers or all of these kind of fabrications that people make in their mind of what blockchain users and developers are like. So we ended up getting both of those bills passed 27-3.
If Brittany sounded excited about the events in Wyoming, partly it was they were so fresh. The session took place Monday, March 12th, and Governor Matt Mead of Wyoming had signed those bills on the weekend, 2 days before this session. University of Wyoming, UW, played a role in this because Caitlin Long, the woman in Wyoming who took such a lead in this whole project, had tried to donate Bitcoin to the university that had appreciated. She got some Bitcoin and there was a big appreciation. She wanted to make a gift to the university, but the laws of the state at the time didn't allow it. So that's how this whole project got started. I asked Brittany if the passage of these laws was going to put the University of Wyoming in a favored position in the future development of blockchain technology.
Well, we flew in tons of blockchain entrepreneurs to throw an event to thank all the legislators for being so forward thinking. And the next day we did a field trip to Laramie. and the university welcomed us with all the people that are currently in their blockchain developers program. Yeah. And they're building decentralized applications and testing things out and running pilots, and that's going to be absolutely huge. I mean, Wyoming now can become a massive blockchain development center. They have one of the world's most powerful supercomputers that produces extra power. Therefore, it's, I think, the cheapest place in the United States for power. So building out massive mining operations, everything that you can imagine. It's going to be huge. Yeah.
Better than coal.
Yeah, exactly. Coal and cattle have worked very well for Wyoming, but I think blockchain is going to really put it on the map.
The way Bitcoin is created has to do with computers whirring away at complex mathematical transactions. I don't understand that part one bit, but I know that the term mining has to do with how computers actually generate Bitcoin and some of the other currencies. So it's ironic because Wyoming is heavily related in its history to mining coal, uranium, and also oil and gas. So here comes something new to mine that points very much to the future. That story just tickled me to death, and I was so glad I had a chance to talk to Brittany after her session. As I was learning about blockchain in the abstract at these various sessions, I was also very curious about how I can participate in this. I had bought one Ether using the Coinbase app on my iPhone, but I knew that I wasn't really getting in as close to the actual blockchain as I might. I sat down next to a guy at a session and I said, gee, how can I get my Ether on the Coinbase over to the Ethereum platform where I'm actually on the blockchain? And he gave me a website to go to, myetherwallet.com. Today, as I've been working on the show, I managed to figure out how to get my Ether transferred. It's going to take 3 days for it to clear, and I now have a My Ether wallet address, which I'm going to list in the show notes of this episode. This is a public address, and I've seen other people use it, where if you have an Ether and you'd like to support the Kindle Chronicles podcast, you can send it to me at this public address. Then there's a very private key that is how I can send money, or I think receive money as well. Obviously, I'm not making that available, but you will find my public Ether address. And if you're one of the listeners who is already way ahead of me on this and you'd like to give a small token of Ether love to the podcast, you might have a chance to be the very first person to do it. Now, the next thing that I want to try is to create a currency myself, and there was one speaker that indicated that that's very doable. What you do with that currency is a whole nother matter. I thought I might get some ideas on what to do with a currency from the next listener that you're going to hear from. I drove an hour north of Austin on Tuesday to sit down for a wonderful barbecue lunch, and we recorded this conversation afterward.
I'm Mark Roberts, and I listen faithfully to the Kindle Chronicles.
Do you have a day job?
Yes, I do have a day job. I'm a preacher for the Westside Church of Christ, and enjoy doing that very, very much.
Where do we have our barbecue?
We are in Belton, Texas, which is a small town in central Texas, north of Austin, about an hour. We're at Miller's Smokehouse, and they make amazing barbecue.
You made the mistake of asking me about blockchain and Bitcoin and what I know about it. And based on my imperfect description of the technology and the potential for it, you came up with the idea to create a crypto currency named the Carson. Tell me about that.
I think I'm doing that. It's a really good tactic if you're eating lunch with Lynn to just say, tell me about blockchain, and then he will talk while you eat. And that worked out really well for me. I am going to create my own cryptocurrency and put Bitcoin completely out of business. It will be called the Carson, and we'll have a little Scotty Dog silhouette as our logo, and you can spend those at Carson's Coffee Shop, which is conveniently located in my kitchen.
And I'm going to create a cryptocurrency named the Claire, and we're both going to go to Cheyenne, Wyoming, which is the first state in the union to make this legal to get this set up. A road trip to Cheyenne next.
Absolutely. I'll look for the barbecue places if you'll search out the coffee shops. I think that'll work great.
As you can tell, Mark and I had some fun playing around with the topic of blockchain and cryptocurrencies. We did touch on possibly some serious uses of it. In my case, if I create some kind of a cryptocurrency, there might be some exchanges of services or products having to do with the podcast that could be paid for this way. And these get to the use of a token as not being a currency that people are going to buy to invest in or see appreciation like an investment, but they're tokens that are used within a community for exchange of services and products, and that makes them a utility token, which is different than an actual currency. In his case, a church, you can imagine people giving donations in a currency somehow if they buy into it, and then within the realm of the currency, perhaps they might be buying the newsletter. Now, as it happens, Mark does a really high-level newsletter, which I receive on my Kindle. I'm a subscriber to it, and that's an example of a service that perhaps a church that had its own currency system, the Carson, might be able to add some value to members of the congregation. I asked Mark to tell us what the response has been like to his newsletter and how difficult it was to get it set up.
It does pretty well. It was harder than we thought. Initially, I thought that we could email a PDF to people, and one of the things that we learned very quickly is that spammers use PDFs and that kind of thing, and so email servers just clip those. They don't even arrive. If you send somebody a PDF, especially if there's a lot of email addresses on the line, it's just never going to get there. They're going to say this is spam. So our initial distribution idea totally did not work. That was difficult. If you authorize us with your Kindle email address to send directly to your Kindle account, then it's not too complicated for it to just magically arrive, which is really a neat deal. I do wish very much as I like Amazon, and I would be hesitant to say anything bad about Amazon on the Kindle Chronicles, I really think that's an area that they're missing the ability to set up some subscriptions and to do that. They've done a little bit of that, but it's clear they've kind of dipped their toe in the water. They haven't really thought that through, and I think that's an area where they could do a lot better. Sometimes some of the system makes it a little hard for me to get you the magazine each month.
Are you creating it in Word?
It is done in Word. That's and we have a lady who does the formatting. I do not do the formatting. I write, and all the other columnists write, and then I edit all of that, and I send it to the formatting department. It's kind of like the shoemaker's elves. In the morning, there are elves on the table, or shoes on the table.
What's the name of it, and how can people subscribe?
It's called Pressing On, and it's a Christian magazine, so you can subscribe at pressingonmagazine.com. Thanks for giving us a plug, Lynn. Appreciate that very much. And it's $10 a year, which is an amazing low price for something that you get once a month, and it's somewhere between 25 and 30 pages. It's a lot of good writing for that.
It's good stuff. And thank you for the barbecue.
It was really, really good barbecue with amazing banana pudding and cookies and coffee at the end. Thanks for meeting me today.
I'm sure it won't surprise you that as I was learning about blockchain at South by Southwest and talking with people, I was constantly thinking about what Amazon might do with this technology in the future. And I had a chance to talk to a number of the speakers in brief interviews after their sessions on that question. Brittany Kaiser, the woman that you heard talking about the Wyoming initiative, was one of the first people that I asked. If I said, if you were Jeff Bezos, what would you be doing with blockchain technology?
Trust me, he's already on that. But specifically, I would be having more of an open marketplace where people are controlling their transactions more directly with the people that are buying from them. And that's actually one of the things that Amazon did very well on. And that's why they are who they are today, specifically because he allowed that user-to-user interaction and didn't really build a very... obviously, it's a centralized infrastructure, but it's meant for users to interact with each other. And so it's going to be quite easy for Amazon to blockchain itself. And they've already purchased all the URLs, so I know they're on it.
In several sessions, Google and Facebook were mentioned as places that could be disrupted once blockchain technology gives us the ability to have more control over our identity, that we don't become a product that's sold to advertisers, that if all of our information is on a sort of portable blockchain database, we might actually benefit when our posts are used for advertising. When I asked Doc Searles about this, he has a long perspective on the Internet. We talked about his description of the creation of the Internet as a protocol, and he co-wrote a classic titled The Clue Train Manifesto. When I asked him how come Amazon doesn't seem to be mentioned as often as these other companies in terms of disruption by blockchain, he focused on the difference between a B2B company, business to business, or a B2C company, business to consumer.
When you're looking for people being paranoid about their personal data and all that, Amazon comes up much less than Google and Facebook do. And the reason is, I believe, that people are actually customers of Amazon. It's a B2C company. It's not a B2B company. Google and Facebook are B2B companies in which the C is the product being sold to a B, right? So, and Apple too. Okay, and Apple has really good privacy policy, as does Microsoft. Microsoft and Apple, the original personal computer companies that are B2C companies as well as B2B companies, are relatively trusted and also are sensitive to their customers. They care about those things. I was talking to Julie Brill earlier, who was with the FTC and now she works for Microsoft. And they're working really hard in Microsoft on not only respecting personal privacy, but equipping it in different ways. And Apple's doing the same thing. And Apple's behind on some things like spying on people. They can't guess at you as well as Google and Amazon can because they don't want to know as much about you. Your data is your data. So the B2C companies kind of get a free ride on this to some degree. I'm not saying they're completely innocent. I think that the ad tech side of Amazon is bad and is doing bad things, and that's just me speaking personally, and that's as a big Amazon customer like the rest of us are. I think Amazon has a lot of really good and bad effects on culture and on business, but they're not so much in this conversation because they're a B2C company.
If I had to pick one panel that impressed me the most, it would be the one titled Blockchain Opportunities in Mobility and Logistics. These were practitioners that were talking about what they're doing and what's coming in blockchain in a very savvy, down-to-earth way, at the same time that they're open to huge possible changes. And my favorite member of that panel was Chris Ballinger of the Toyota Research Institute. In the question and answer period, I wanted to see if they would be able to make any distinction between Walmart and Amazon in terms of which company might take more of a leadership role in blockchain. They had a little trouble understanding the question at first, that the acoustics in the room weren't terrific. But this is the actual recording from the South by Southwest website, and I'll have a link to it in the show notes. The first two panel members who responded to my question chose Amazon as likely to lead Walmart. A slightly more interesting response came from Chris Ballinger, who at first chose Amazon, but then he started thinking kind of on his feet. He was the guy from Toyota Research Institute, and he came up with some scenarios that might not be quite so favorable to Amazon.
Who do you think is more likely to leave the other behind in blockchain technology, Walmart or Amazon?
What was the question? Sorry, who will lead?
Walmart or Amazon? Those are our only two choices.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Chris's threat to the executives. You don't want to be left behind by your competitors as a motivator. So clearly big players are eyeing each other. And whether you know what Amazon is up to or Walmart is up to, or just a sense of their ability to disrupt themselves in the face of something like this, which company do you think would be most likely to take a leadership position in blockchain as opposed to a following position?
I guess between these two companies, knowing Amazon's expertise in digital stuff, my bet would be on Amazon.
My bet would be on Amazon.
Wow. I mean, Amazon is such an amazing company and does everything so well. It'd be hard to bet against them. Nobody's won that bet yet. On the other hand, Walmart's done some really interesting things in supply chain and in provenance. And in some sense, it may be easier to leapfrog when you're coming from two steps back. There might be a sense in which Amazon is the equivalent of the companies that were disrupted by the internet. Right? They may be natively digital, but not natively blockchain. It may be hard for them to do something that's totally different. That said, Amazon, I think, did announce a blockchain as a service for their clients.
Right. Yeah. So it was coming. I mean, blockchain as a service, they have to provide it through their AWS, ecosystem. But I also read something day before yesterday about how Costco is now moving into the blockchain world. So look out for that. That might be the third option for you.
So let me say one other sort of big picture thing about if you look at the history of the 21st century, right, this has been the rise of these network companies, right? Amazon, Google, Facebook, right? Apple. These are network business models that have been incredibly successful and created trillions of dollars, and these are the biggest companies in the S&P. What blockchain does is it undoes those networks and disintermediates the network players. You don't need a centralized authority anymore, and this is where those companies have made their money, by creating themselves as the monopoly-like intermediaries of the new networks. So it's possible, right, that this favors the old economy companies over the new economy companies. Possible. Who knows?
As I was putting the show together today, I came across an article in Bitcoin Magazine by Eric Kubler. Could an Amazon token become a viable worldwide cryptocurrency? And it's a very detailed speculation piece about how an Amazon coin could be used to pay suppliers. Customers could use it. It would be a hybrid token, a hybrid between a security and a utility-based token, unlocking additional benefits that regular currency cannot, and entitling token holders to Amazon's future cash flows, similar to stock. It's a really intriguing take on all the different ways that this technology might be used by Amazon. I'll have a link to that in the show notes, and it'll give you it'll sort of open your mind to all the things that we might be seeing in the next few years. I agree with the people that say that Amazon is probably already on this, and as you heard, they're already offering it blockchain services as part of AWS, and it's going to be fun to have immersed myself as much in blockchain technology at South by Southwest this year, 2018, and then see what kinds of things might unfold in the next 5 or 10 years from Amazon. Of course, within the next 5 or 10 years, we will know where HQ2 will be located. One of the panels that interested me a lot was titled Primed for Amazon, Value and Cost of HQ2 for Cities. It had 2 mayors on it, Sylvester James of Kansas City and Nancy McFarland of the city of Raleigh. Raleigh is still in the running. Kansas City did not make the top 20. Sylvester James, African-American, a very impressive guy. I think he's ending his second term as mayor. And at one point, he asked us all to look around the large meeting room there at South by Southwest and say, who's missing? Well, it was pretty obvious it was people of color. We were a pretty white group there at South by Southwest throughout the conference, not just at that event. And that led me to ask a question of him when I had a chance to talk after the session.
it was a pretty dramatic moment when you asked us to look around the room and see who wasn't here. Clearly, people of color. When you looked around the teams from Amazon that you dealt with, what kind of a culture of inclusivity did you see there?
I didn't deal directly with any of the teams from Amazon, quite frankly, not on this deal. And when we have had deals with them in which I've been involved, it's usually just been an individual, one or two people at the most. And it's not been very broad on the color spectrum. But, that could be a matter of happenstance as well. But I didn't deal with any teams of Amazon people. I left that to our development people. And I didn't hear any strange reports, but I don't think they had much direct contact with Amazon at all during the process, not personal contact.
Are you familiar with any of Amazon's initiatives in Seattle? Like they've got homeless housing in one of their corporate buildings, Mary's Place, things like that. Yeah. Among mayors, do you hear good things from what kind of a citizen they are in Seattle so far? Well,
I hear that they are a good citizen in terms of those things, but I also hear that their very presence has had some non-desirous impacts in terms of housing and displacement and those types of things. And sometimes, anytime you have a company that wields that kind of power, sometimes they get a little... perhaps from perception standpoint, pushy or demanding. But I've not heard any things that were really horrible, except the people that I've heard the most complaints from are residents of Seattle who have been displaced by the impact that Amazon has had on housing prices and on space.
You got a good look at this whole process. Now you're out of the top 20. If you had to bet which city's going to get it, who would you choose?
Oh, I'm going to bet someplace on the East Coast. And to some extent, I think that might be because of the density and some of the infrastructure that's already there. But I also think that, one of the historic issues in this country is the two coasts, and really nothing else exists. And that's their loss, because I think there's so much more in the Midwest than people think that they're missing out. But if I'm going to bet it's probably going to be an East Coast city.
Among the East Coast, Boston, Newark, D.C., which would you pick on the East Coast?
D.C. maybe. I don't know about Newark, but I'd say D.C. might be. Maybe Boston. I'd say those are probably the ones that I would look to first.
Well, as you can see, it was a very full week in Austin. I've got a couple of things which I will probably hold over for future shows, and I do want to include an unusual opportunity I had to get someone whose hearing is wonderfully better than mine, my cousin Peter, who's been blind from birth, and I stay with Peter each time I go to South by Southwest. He's a great chef, and we browse some of the barbecue joints in Austin while I'm there. On the first night, we went to Best Buy, and Peter bought an Apple HomePod. He already had an Amazon Echo. This gave us a chance to compare them.
Alexa, play Arturo Toscanini and NBC Symphony from my library.
Shuffling songs by Arturo Toscanini, NBC Symphony Orchestra, from your library.
There it is.
Okay, now, so describe that sound to me as you're hearing it. What are you noticing when you hear that?
It's very even, a little muted.
Is this an old recording?
Yes, it's 1947.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Alexa, stop. Now, can you pull up that same music on...
Hey, Siri, play my playlist Prelude.
Playlist Prelude, now playing.
Now, what's different about this?
It's higher volume, more bass and more treble.
Okay, now lower the volume a little so we can talk. So what do you mean more bass and more treble?
Well, it's got more body all around.
Right. Which do you prefer?
When I'm cleaning up the house, I prefer this because I can walk around the house and hear it all. If I'm seated listening intensely to something, I think it's the Alexa is a more balanced sound that allows me to analyze things better.
My guest next week will be Blake Pollard of Readly, a digital magazine subscription service based in Sweden. He represents Readly in the U.S. from his office in Austin. Looking ahead, I will be speaking with Goodreads co-founder and CEO Otis Chandler for the show March 30th, and one of Darlene's favorite mystery writers, Elizabeth George, on TKC 505 on April 6th. I hope you enjoyed our trip to Austin, and I really appreciate your listening to my podcast. Have a great day. Bye.